The Philadelphia courthouse doors burst open with a thunderous bang that echoed through the marble hallway. Officer Marcus Chen walked in with deliberate, measured steps, his German Shepherd partner Detective Max beside him, their synchronized footsteps creating a rhythmic percussion that demanded attention. The massive courtroom fell silent the moment they entered. Journalists scattered like startled birds, frantically scribbling notes on their pads. Cameras flashed outside the doors, creating a strobe light effect that made the moment feel surreal and cinematic. This wasn't just any custody case. It was a media sensation that had consumed local news cycles for weeks. The court had been packed since dawn, with people standing in the hallways because every seat was occupied. Judge Patricia Morrison, a woman renowned throughout Pennsylvania for her ruthless pursuit of justice and her zero-tolerance policy for deception, sat elevated on her bench watching everything with hawk-like intensity. Her reputation preceded her like a shadow. She'd overturned cases based on technicalities, exposed corrupt attorneys who thought they could slide under her radar, and never, not once in her 30-year career, tolerated lies in her courtroom. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Her reading glasses hung on a chain around her neck. Her expression was one of calculated patience mixed with underlying fury, as if she already sensed the ugliness that was about to unfold before her. The bailiff called for order and everyone rose. The energy in the courtroom was electric, almost suffocating. You could feel the tension in the air like humidity before a thunderstorm. Marcus had been to hundreds of courtrooms. He'd testified in drug cases, weapons cases, major crimes, but he'd never felt a courtroom quite like this one. There was something darker here, something that made his skin crawl. Max sensed it too. The dog's ears were alert, his muscles tense, his breathing slightly accelerated. Marcus had learned long ago never to ignore Max's instincts. That dog had saved his life more times than he could count. Then she arrived. The bailiff announced the entry of the minor witness, and the courtroom doors opened again. A social worker entered first, carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression of professional concern. Behind her walked 3-year-old Emma Thompson, a tiny child who barely reached the social worker's waist. She was dressed in a pink princess dress with white tights and shiny black shoes, looking like she was going to a birthday party instead of a courtroom. Her blonde hair was curled perfectly, her appearance meticulously prepared. But her eyes, her eyes told a completely different story. Emma's eyes screamed silent horror. They darted frantically around the courtroom, taking in the towering ceilings, the imposing judge's bench, the sea of faces staring at her with intense interest. Her little hands were shaking so violently that the social worker had to hold them steady. Her lips trembled constantly, as if she was on the verge of crying but was somehow holding the tears back through sheer force of will. There was something deeply, profoundly wrong. This wasn't normal nervousness about testifying. This was the kind of fear you see in children who have been traumatized, threatened, or psychologically manipulated, beyond what a 3-year-old mind could process. On the left side of the courtroom sat James Thompson, Emma's father. He was a handsome man in his late 30s, wearing an expensive suit and a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Next to him sat his attorney, a shark-faced man named David Kowalski, who had a reputation for winning custody battles at any cost. Kowalski was whispering something into James's ear, and both men were watching Emma with an intensity that made Marcus's stomach turn. There was something predatory about their gaze, something that suggested they had a plan, a carefully orchestrated strategy to manipulate this child's testimony. On the right side of the courtroom sat Sarah Thompson, Emma's mother. She was a slight woman with worried eyes and trembling hands. Her attorney, a younger woman named Jennifer Martinez who specialized in protecting children's rights, sat beside her with a notepad already filled with observations. Sarah's eyes never left her daughter. She looked like she wanted to run across the courtroom and scoop Emma into her arms, but instead, she sat frozen, forced to watch her child's terror from a distance. Occasionally, Sarah's eyes would fill with tears that she would blink away, trying to maintain composure. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation and underlying dread. Everyone could feel it. Something catastrophic was about to unfold. This wasn't just about custody arrangements or visitation schedules. This was about a child's soul hanging in the balance, about truth versus manipulation, about justice versus corruption. The stakes felt impossibly high. Marcus could sense the electricity in the room, that tangible feeling you get when you know you're about to witness something significant, something that would matter. Judge Morrison leaned forward from her elevated position, her sharp eyes studying Emma with the intensity of someone who had seen thousands of cases and could read the subtle signs of abuse, manipulation, and trauma like others read books. Her expression grew darker with each second she observed the trembling child. She had seen guilty people before. She'd seen hardened criminals, white-collar criminals, abusive parents, but never had she seen a 3-year-old with this level of pure, existential terror. This child wasn't just scared of the courtroom or the public speaking aspect of testimony. This child was scared of what might happen if she said the wrong thing. This child had been threatened. Marcus whispered something to Max, and the dog settled slightly, though his alert status remained unchanged. The courtroom continued its hushed murmuring, everyone sensing that something unprecedented was about to occur. Judge Morrison adjusted her glasses and opened the file before her. Her jaw clenched as she reviewed the documents. The custody battle between James and Sarah Thompson had been filed 6 months ago, but the circumstances were unusual. There were allegations from both sides, claims and counterclaims, accusations of parental unfitness. But what made this case truly disturbing was the psychological evaluation reports that suggested Emma had been exposed to conflicting narratives designed to turn her against one parent. The court clerk was preparing to swear in Emma as a witness when Judge Morrison raised her hand. She removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes, a gesture that suggested she was already exhausted by what she was seeing. She looked directly at Emma, and for a moment, her stern judicial expression softened ever so slightly. You could see the human being beneath the judge, a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting the vulnerable and exposing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be. "We will take a 5-minute recess," Judge Morrison announced, her voice echoing through the courtroom. "Everyone remain in their seats. This child needs a moment, and frankly, so do I." As the bailiff called for the recess, Marcus felt Max's body tense even more. The dog's instincts were screaming. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong in this case, and Max, with his extraordinary ability to read human behavior and detect deception, already knew it. Marcus patted the dog reassuringly, but even he was uncertain about what horrors were about to be revealed in this courtroom. He just knew, from his years of experience and from Max's reaction, that this day would change everything. The 5-minute recess stretched into an uncomfortable silence. Judge Morrison sat motionless on her bench, her hands folded before her, her eyes closed as if she was gathering strength from somewhere deep within her soul. The courtroom remained eerily quiet. Even the journalists had stopped their frantic scribbling, sensing that they were witnessing something beyond the scope of a typical custody battle. The air felt heavy, charged with foreboding. Marcus stood near the back with Max, the dog still in a heightened state of alertness, his muscles tense beneath his fur, his breathing shallow and controlled. The bailiff's voice cut through the silence. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison is reconvening court." Everyone stood immediately, the scraping of chairs against the floor creating a discordant symphony. Judge Morrison took her seat with the gravity of someone about to make a decision that would reverberate through the legal system. She looked directly at the court clerk and nodded. "Bring the minor witness back into the courtroom," she commanded. Emma was led back in by the social worker, her tiny hand gripping the woman's sleeve as if it were a lifeline. The child looked even smaller now, if that was possible. Her eyes were red-rimmed, suggesting she had been crying in the anteroom. She was guided to a special witness chair designed for young children, a chair with cushions and guardrails to make it feel less intimidating. But nothing could make this situation feel safe for a 3-year-old. Attorney David Kowalski rose from his seat with the swagger of a man who had won countless custody battles through manipulation and legal maneuvering. He wore an expensive silk tie and had perfectly coiffed hair. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. He approached the witness chair with measured steps, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor with each step. Marcus felt Max tense even more. The dog didn't like this man. Marcus could feel it in the way Max's body had shifted, in the way his ears had pinned back slightly. "Good morning, Emma," Kowalski said in a voice dripping with false sweetness. It was the kind of voice predators use, gentle on the surface but concealing something sinister beneath. "I'm Mr. Kowalski. I just want to ask you some questions about your family, okay?" Emma's entire body convulsed involuntarily. She didn't answer verbally, just nodded slightly, her eyes fixed on her lap. "Emma, sweetheart," Kowalski continued, his tone becoming even more saccharine, "you love your daddy very much, don't you?" The question was innocent enough on the surface, but there was something in the way he asked it, something in his inflection and body language, that felt predatory. Emma's lip quivered. Her small hands gripped the arms of the witness chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Why, yes," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible even in the silent courtroom. But there was no conviction in that single word. It sounded like a response she had been forced to memorize, like a line in a script she had been drilled on repeatedly. "And Emma," Kowalski pressed forward, moving closer to the child, "your mommy is mean to you sometimes, isn't she? Your mommy yells at you and doesn't let you do fun things, right?" Marcus's stomach turned. This was witness coaching in its most blatant form. This attorney was literally putting words in this child's mouth, constructing a narrative designed to manipulate her testimony. It was disgusting and illegal, but Kowalski was doing it with such practiced precision that it would be hard to prove unless someone intervened. Emma's face crumpled. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. She looked like she might hyperventilate or pass out completely. The social worker in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing signs of severe psychological distress. Jennifer Martinez, Sarah's attorney, was making frantic notes, documenting every leading question, every manipulation tactic. I don't," Emma stammered, unable to form complete sentences. Her eyes darted toward her mother, then quickly away, as if she was afraid of what would happen if she looked at Sarah for too long. Kowalski pressed harder. "Emma, your daddy took you to get ice cream last weekend, didn't he? And you had so much fun with daddy, much more fun than you have with mommy." The questions kept coming, each one more leading than the last, each one designed to elicit predetermined answers that would support James Thompson's custody case. Emma's hands began to shake so badly that she could barely grip the chair arms. Her breathing came in short, panicked gasps. She looked like a small animal caught in a trap, desperately searching for an escape route. The courtroom watched in real time as a 3-year-old child was being psychologically tortured by an adult authority figure. It was horrifying. It was unconscionable. And it was happening right there, in front of a judge who was supposed to protect vulnerable witnesses. Judge Morrison's expression changed. Her jaw clenched so tightly that you could see the muscles working in her face. Her hands, which had been folded serenely before her, suddenly gripped the edge of her bench. Her knuckles whitened from the force of her grip. Her eyes narrowed to slits as she watched Kowalski continue his manipulation without any regard for the child's well-being. It was clear that she had seen enough. The judge's tolerance for injustice, even subtle injustice, had reached its absolute limit. "Stop," Judge Morrison commanded, her voice booming through the courtroom like thunder. The single word carried such authority and power that Kowalski froze mid-question. Emma flinched, startled by the sudden loudness. Every eye in the courtroom turned toward the judge's bench. Judge Morrison stood up slowly, deliberately, her eyes locked on Kowalski with a gaze that could incinerate steel. "You are coaching this witness," she said coldly. "You are asking leading questions designed to manipulate a 3-year-old child into providing false testimony. This is unacceptable. This is unconscionable. This is a violation of every ethical principle that governs the practice of law." Kowalski sputtered, trying to defend himself. "Your Honor, I was merely—" "You are done speaking," Judge Morrison interrupted, raising her hand in a gesture that silenced him instantly. "You will sit down immediately, or I will hold you in contempt of court." Kowalski reluctantly returned to his seat, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Judge Morrison then did something completely unprecedented, something that would later be analyzed in law schools and judicial conferences across America. She looked directly at the child, and her stern judicial expression softened into something almost maternal. "Emma, sweetheart, I know this is scary. I know you're confused, but I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are safe now. No one is going to hurt you in this courtroom. I'm not going to let that happen." Then she turned to Marcus. "Officer Chen, I have an extraordinary request. It goes against every courtroom protocol I know, but I believe it's necessary. May Detective Max sit beside this child during the remainder of her testimony." The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Attorney Martinez stood up, nodding vigorously in support. Kowalski immediately rose, objecting loudly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We cannot have an animal in the witness box. This violates every standard of courtroom procedure." "I don't care about protocol," Judge Morrison said coldly, her voice cutting through Kowalski's objections like a knife through butter. "I care about truth. I care about protecting a vulnerable child from psychological abuse. I care about justice. And this child is terrified, so terrified that she cannot speak freely. If a dog can help her feel safe enough to tell the truth, then that dog will sit beside her." Overruled. Marcus hesitated for only a fraction of a second before nodding. He had never done anything like this in his career. Dogs didn't belong in witness stands. But he understood what Judge Morrison was doing. She was creating an environment where truth could emerge, where a traumatized child could find the courage to speak authentically. He clipped off Max's leash and gestured toward the witness chair. Max walked forward with the calm dignity of a trained professional. The dog's senses were heightened, his instincts already reading the emotional landscape of the courtroom. As Max approached Emma, something miraculous happened. The little girl's eyes widened, not with additional fear, but with something resembling recognition and hope. She reached out her tiny hand and touched Max's soft golden fur. The dog, trained specifically to sense emotional distress and provide comfort to traumatized individuals, immediately lowered his head. Emma buried her face in Max's neck, her small body pressing against the dog's warm, solid frame. Within seconds, Emma's trembling stopped. Her breathing normalized. Her racing heartbeat slowed. It was as if Max had unlocked something hidden deep within her frightened soul, some primal understanding that here, finally, was someone who wanted nothing from her except her truth. The courtroom had transformed into something almost sacred. The air itself seemed to shift as Max settled beside Emma, his massive frame providing a protective barrier between the child and the rest of the world. Judge Morrison watched intently from her bench, her earlier fury tempered now by something more profound, a deep understanding that she was witnessing a turning point, a moment where truth might finally have a chance to emerge from the wreckage of manipulation and lies. Emma's small hand remained on Max's fur, her fingers moving in gentle, repetitive motions that seemed to calm both the child and the dog. The social worker who had brought Emma into the courtroom watched with professional recognition, understanding that this was a legitimate therapeutic intervention. Even Kowalski had settled back into his chair, his face flushed with barely contained rage, but he had no legal ground to object further. Judge Morrison had made her ruling, and she would not be swayed. "We will now resume questioning," Judge Morrison announced, her voice returning to its judicial tone, though now it carried an undercurrent of protection. "But let me be absolutely clear to everyone in this courtroom. This child will be treated with respect and compassion. No leading questions, no manipulation, no coaching. Any attorney who violates these standards will be held in contempt of court and reported to the State Bar Association. Am I understood?" "Yes, Your Honor," both attorneys responded in unison, though Kowalski's response was reluctant and resentful. Jennifer Martinez, Sarah's attorney, stood slowly and approached the witness chair with measured steps. Unlike Kowalski, there was genuine kindness in her approach. She carried herself with the careful deliberation of someone who understood the fragility of the moment and the vulnerability of the child before her. She positioned herself at a respectful distance, not looming over Emma or invading her personal space. "Hello, Emma," Jennifer said softly, her voice warm and genuine. "My name is Jennifer. I'm here to help you tell the truth about what you've experienced. There are no right or wrong answers. I just want to hear what really happened, okay?" Emma looked up at Jennifer, then back down at Max, drawing comfort from the dog's presence. She nodded slightly, still not speaking verbally, but the panic in her eyes had diminished considerably. "Emma, can you tell me about a typical day at home? What do you do when you're with your mommy?" The question was open-ended, non-leading, designed to allow Emma to construct her own narrative rather than confirm a predetermined one. Emma's lips parted slowly, hesitantly, as if she was testing whether it was truly safe to speak. Mommy makes breakfast," Emma said quietly, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength with each word. We have pancakes sometimes, and Mommy sings." A barely perceptible smile crossed Emma's face, a genuine smile, not a forced one. "Mommy has a silly voice when she sings." "That sounds lovely," Jennifer said warmly. "And does your mommy yell at you?" Emma's face became serious again. She looked down at Max, her hand gripping the dog's fur more tightly. Mommy gets loud sometimes, when I'm naughty, but she hugs me after. She says she's sorry and that she loves me." The words came out in a rush, as if Emma had been holding them inside for a very long time. Judge Morrison made notes, her expression thoughtful. Kowalski shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly realizing that Emma's genuine testimony was not matching the narrative he had attempted to construct. "Emma, what about time with your daddy?" Jennifer asked gently. "Tell me about a day you spent with your daddy." Emma's entire demeanor changed. Her hand stopped moving on Max's fur. Her breathing became slightly faster. She glanced toward her father's seat, then quickly looked away as if she was afraid of making direct eye contact. Max, with his extraordinary sensitivity to human emotion, responded immediately. The dog pressed his body more firmly against Emma's side, a physical reassurance that she was protected. Daddy gave me candy," Emma said slowly, each word seeming to require tremendous effort. He said if I was a good girl and remembered what he told me, I could have ice cream." Emma paused, her small brow furrowing as if she was trying to navigate between two conflicting memories, the real experience and the coached version she had been forced to memorize. "What did your daddy tell you to remember?" Jennifer asked carefully, her tone remaining neutral and supportive. Emma's entire body tensed. Her hand began to shake again. Max turned his head and looked directly at the child, his dark eyes filled with a kind of profound understanding that seemed to transcend species boundaries. It was as if the dog was communicating wordlessly. "It's okay. I'm here. You can tell the truth. I won't let anything bad happen to you." Daddy said Mommy was mean," Emma whispered, the words coming out in fragments. "He said Mommy yells too much, he said if I didn't tell the lady in the office those things then." Emma's voice broke completely. Tears began streaming down her small face. "He said Mommy would go to jail and it would be MY's fault." The courtroom gasped audibly. Journalists leaned forward in their seats. Even Judge Morrison's expression hardened further, her fury at what had been done to this child becoming almost palpable. "He said if I said the wrong thing, Mommy would go to jail," Emma continued, her words tumbling out now in a torrent of pent-up emotion and truth. "And I would have to live with him forever and ever, and I would never see Mommy again." Fresh sobs racked her small body. This was it. This was the moment when the manipulation became undeniably clear. This was the moment when the courtroom understood that a 3-year-old child had been psychologically tortured, threatened with abandonment, and coerced into constructing false narratives about her mother. "Emma, sweetheart," Jennifer said, moving slightly closer, her voice filled with compassion, "you don't have to worry about that anymore. Your mommy is not going to go to jail. None of this is your fault. You are a brave, brave girl for telling the truth." But Emma wasn't finished. As if a dam had broken inside her, she continued, her words becoming more rapid and more emotional. "I don't like it when Daddy takes me to his office. The man there, Mr. Kowalski, he keeps asking me questions and I don't know what the right answers are. Daddy told me the answers, but I forget them sometimes. And Daddy gets mad when I forget." Kowalski stood up abruptly, his face absolutely crimson. "Your Honor, this is clearly a coached response from the mother's side." "Sit down, Mr. Kowalski," Judge Morrison said coldly, her voice sharp as a blade. "You are in no position to make accusations. This child is finally telling the truth, and you will listen to every word of it." Emma's words kept coming, each one like a brick being removed from a wall that had been constructed to imprison her truth. She described the times her father had drilled her on false stories about her mother. She described the times he had withheld affection when she deviated from the script. She described the candy and the ice cream, and the promises that she would be the best girl in the world, if she just said the things her daddy and Mr. Kowalski had taught her to say. And through it all, Max remained beside her, a silent sentinel of truth and protection. The dog's presence created a safe container for Emma's testimony, a space where the truth could finally emerge without fear. Then came the moment that would define everything that followed. As Emma spoke about the most recent time her father had coached her, telling her exactly what to say in court, she suddenly turned toward Max. She leaned down and whispered something directly into the dog's ear, something so quiet that no one else in the courtroom could hear. Her tiny hand gripped Max's fur, and her lips moved against the dog's ear in what appeared to be a confession or plea for understanding. The courtroom fell completely silent. Every eye was fixed on the child and the dog. Everyone sensed that something profound was happening, something that transcended the normal mechanics of courtroom testimony. Emma was not speaking to adults or to the machinery of justice. She was speaking to the one being in that courtroom who had proven, through his presence alone, that he cared about nothing except her truth and her safety. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of her bench. Journalists held their breath. Even the court stenographer's fingers hovered over her keyboard, capturing every detail of this extraordinary moment. No one knew what Emma had whispered, but what happened next would change the entire trajectory of the case. The moment Emma's whisper reached Max's ear, something primal awakened within the dog. His entire body went rigid, every muscle tensing simultaneously as if he had been struck by an electrical current. The transformation was instantaneous and unmistakable. This wasn't a gentle shift in posture or a subtle behavioral adjustment. This was a complete recalibration of Max's entire being, a recognition that the threat level had intensified exponentially. Officer Marcus Chen felt the shift immediately. He had trained alongside Max for 5 years, had partnered with this extraordinary animal through countless drug busts, criminal apprehensions, and dangerous situations. He knew every nuance of Max's behavioral language, every microexpression, every subtle change in muscle tension. He understood Max's communication system as intimately as a parent understands their child's cries. And right now, Max was communicating something profound and urgent. The dog's ears, which had been in a relaxed, attentive position, suddenly shot upright like radar dishes detecting an incoming signal. They rotated slightly, the internal mechanisms of his canine hearing adjusting to catch every sound in the courtroom. Max's dark brown eyes, which had been soft and warm moments before, now hardened into laser-focused intensity. His pupils dilated, his gaze becoming penetrating and analytical, as if he was seeing beyond the surface of things into the hidden truths beneath. A low, rumbling sound emerged from deep within Max's chest, a sound that wasn't quite a growl but something more complex and deliberate. It was a vocalization that communicated protection, warning, and absolute certainty about a threat. The sound was profound and ancient, the voice of a creature whose instincts were honed by thousands of years of evolution to detect danger and defend the vulnerable. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Even the journalists, trained to remain composed in any situation, felt a chill run down their spines at the sound. Max's massive body, which weighed approximately 85 pounds of pure muscle and bone, began to shift and reorient itself. The dog pressed his body more firmly against Emma's side, but the positioning was different now. Before, he had been comforting and gentle. Now, he was tactical and protective. His shoulders broadened, his stance widening to create a physical barrier between the child and the rest of the courtroom. It was as if Max had positioned himself as a living shield, a declaration that no one would harm this child without going through him first. Officer Marcus's instincts activated simultaneously with Max's transformation. He recognized what was happening because he had witnessed it before in dangerous situations. This was Max's threat response, the behavioral pattern the dog displayed when he had detected danger to someone under his protection. But this threat response was usually reserved for situations involving weapons, explosives, or violent criminals. The fact that Max was displaying this level of alert intensity in a courtroom, in response to Emma's whispered words, indicated something deeply disturbing. Marcus moved his hand slightly, establishing a subtle communication with Max through their bond. The gesture wasn't a command to attack or escalate, but rather a signal that Marcus was acknowledging Max's alert status and was prepared to respond to whatever the dog had detected. Years of partnership had taught them to communicate without words, through the language of intention and trust. Judge Morrison rose from her seat again, but this time her movement was slower, more calculated, as if she was deliberately trying not to startle the dog or the child. Her earlier fury had been replaced by intense, focused attention. She understood that she was witnessing something extraordinary, something that went beyond standard courtroom procedure and entered the realm of almost mystical perception. Max had detected something, and whatever that something was, it was important. "Officer Chen," Judge Morrison said carefully, her voice steady and calm despite the extraordinary tension in the courtroom. "What is Detective Max indicating?" Marcus took a moment to respond, his eyes never leaving Max's behavior, analyzing every detail of the dog's physical positioning and expression. "Your Honor, Max is displaying his threat detection response. This is the behavioral pattern he exhibits when he identifies a significant danger to the individual under his protection. The intensity of his response suggests he has detected something profoundly concerning." "Is the child in immediate physical danger?" Judge Morrison asked, her judicial composure intact but her concern for Emma evident. "No, Your Honor. If there was immediate physical danger, Max's response would be more aggressive and more direct. What I'm observing is Max indicating psychological or emotional threat. He's detected deception, manipulation, or intent to harm the child's well-being." As Marcus spoke, Max's head suddenly rotated with mechanical precision. The dog's entire attention shifted away from Emma and toward one specific location in the courtroom, directly toward attorney David Kowalski. The movement was deliberate, pointed, and unmistakable. Max's gaze locked onto Kowalski with an intensity that was almost supernatural. The dog's dark eyes seemed to pierce through the attorney's carefully constructed facade, seeing into the depths of his character and finding something profoundly lacking. Kowalski felt the impact of Max's gaze immediately. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his face paling slightly. He tried to maintain his composure, but you could see the cracks forming in his carefully constructed exterior. He reached for his water glass with a hand that trembled noticeably. He cleared his throat and tried to look away from the dog, but he couldn't. Max's gaze was too powerful, too penetrating, too absolutely certain about what he had detected. "Your Honor, I object to the implication of this dog's behavior," Kowalski said, his voice lacking its earlier confidence and swagger. "A dog cannot provide legal testimony. Whatever behavioral indicators this animal might display are not admissible evidence." "You're right, Mr. Kowalski," Judge Morrison agreed coldly. "However, the dog's behavior is not evidence in itself, but it is a signpost. It indicates to this court that there are serious matters that require investigation, and your nervousness at being the focus of the dog's attention is, I must say, quite revealing." Max's behavior intensified further. The dog stood up, not aggressively, but with clear purpose and intention. He positioned himself between Emma and Kowalski, his body at an angle that maximized his protective stance. His muscles were coiled like springs ready to release. Every ounce of his being communicated a single message. This adult represents a threat to this child, and I will not allow harm to come to her. Emma, sensing Max's protective intensity, gripped the dog's collar with both of her small hands. But she wasn't holding the dog back. Instead, she was holding on to him for reassurance, drawing strength from his unwavering commitment to her safety. The connection between child and dog had transcended the ordinary bonds of human-animal relationships. They had become partners in truth-telling, allies against deception. "Officer Chen, I want you to document everything Detective Max is communicating," Judge Morrison ordered. "Every postural shift, every behavioral indicator, everything. This dog's response, while not legally admissible as direct evidence, establishes a foundation for deeper investigation into this case." Marcus began mentally cataloging Max's behavioral indicators: the rigidity of his muscles, the focus of his gaze, the precision of his movements, the protective positioning. He understood what Max was communicating. The dog was telling the courtroom that Attorney Kowalski represented a threat not just to Emma, but to the integrity of the legal process itself. Sarah Thompson, Emma's mother, watched the entire scene unfold with tears streaming down her face. She had always known something was terribly wrong, but seeing it confirmed so dramatically, seeing a police dog validate her fears and her daughter's experience, was overwhelming. She gripped Jennifer Martinez's arm tightly, her whole body shaking with emotion. James Thompson, Emma's father, had gone completely pale. His earlier swagger and confidence had evaporated entirely. He was realizing in that moment that his carefully orchestrated plan was unraveling. The dog had exposed the psychological manipulation. The child had spoken the truth, and the judge was not going to ignore what she had witnessed. Max released another low vocalization, not a full growl, but a clear and unmistakable warning. It was the sound of an animal that had made a judgment and was declaring it to the world. This man, this attorney, this person represented danger, and Max would not tolerate that danger remaining free to harm the vulnerable child under his protection. Judge Morrison's expression had hardened into something almost crystalline, a perfect fusion of judicial authority and human compassion. She understood now what was truly at stake in this case. This wasn't just about a custody arrangement. This was about the exposure of systemic manipulation and psychological abuse. This was about a dog whose instincts were more reliable than any human institution in detecting the truth that everyone else had been too compromised or too blind to see. "We will take a 30-minute recess," Judge Morrison announced, her voice brooking no argument. "During this time, I am ordering an immediate investigation into Attorney Kowalski's conduct. I am also ordering Child Protective Services to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of this child's physical and psychological state. And I am officially putting on record that Detective Max's behavioral response has indicated serious concerns about witness manipulation and possible child abuse. This court will not be complicit in the victimization of a vulnerable child." As the courtroom erupted into chaos, journalists racing out to file stories, attorneys huddling in desperate consultation, social workers mobilizing to protect Emma, Max remained completely still beside the child. His gaze never wavered from Kowalski. His protective stance never faltered. In that moment, the dog had become more than a police animal. He had become an instrument of justice, a voice for the voiceless, a guardian of truth in a system that had nearly failed a 3-year-old child. The 30-minute recess stretched like an eternity. The courtroom had emptied out almost entirely, with only the essential personnel remaining. Judge Morrison had retreated to her chambers, but not to relax or compose herself. Instead, she was on the phone with the Pennsylvania State Bar Association, the district attorney's office, and the Department of Child Protective Services. Her voice, though muffled behind her closed chamber doors, could occasionally be heard raising in intensity as she described what she had witnessed. There was fury in that voice, the controlled fury of someone who had dedicated her life to justice and was witnessing a blatant violation of everything she believed in. Officer Marcus remained in the courtroom with Emma and Max. The social worker had brought juice boxes and cookies, attempting to create some semblance of normalcy for the traumatized child. But Emma's attention never wavered from Max. She sat curled against the dog's side, her small body folded into the space created by Max's warm, protective frame. The child's breathing had normalized, her trembling had stopped, and her eyes, though still touched by fear, had taken on a quality of determination, as if she understood that she had done something important, something that mattered. Max remained in his vigilant state, his body never fully relaxing, his awareness never diminishing. The dog's eyes occasionally drifted toward the door where Kowalski had exited, then returned to Emma, as if Max was monitoring for threats and reassuring the child simultaneously. It was a masterclass in devotion and protection, a demonstration of the extraordinary bond that could form between a damaged child and a creature whose only agenda was truth and safety. In the hallway outside the courtroom, chaos was erupting. Kowalski was on his cell phone, his earlier confidence completely shattered, replaced by barely concealed panic. "I don't care what you say," he was hissing into the phone. "That dog's behavior doesn't prove anything. We can claim the child was coached by the mother. We can." He stopped abruptly, apparently receiving information that made his face drain of all remaining color. 2 Philadelphia police detectives had arrived at the courthouse with a warrant. They were requesting access to Kowalski's office files, his computer records, and his communications with James Thompson. Word had spread quickly through the legal community about what was happening, and the implications were staggering. If Kowalski was found to have engaged in systematic witness coaching and child manipulation, it wouldn't just end his career, it could result in criminal charges: conspiracy, child abuse, obstruction of justice. The list of potential crimes was extensive. Sarah Thompson sat in a quiet waiting area with Jennifer Martinez, her attorney. Sarah's hands were trembling so violently that she could barely hold her coffee cup. "Is Emma going to be okay?" she asked repeatedly, her voice breaking with each repetition. "Has what she's been through caused permanent damage? Will she ever be able to trust me again? Will she?" Jennifer kept reassuring her, but the truth was that neither of them knew the long-term psychological impact of what this child had endured. James Thompson sat alone on the opposite side of the courthouse, his face a mask of shock and denial. His attorney had advised him to stop speaking entirely, to invoke his right to silence, to prepare for the possibility that his custody case might transform into a criminal investigation. The man who had seemed so confident, so assured of victory, was now confronted with the reality that his actions might have serious legal consequences. He kept muttering to himself, "The dog got it wrong. The dog doesn't know anything. This is a setup." Then the bailiff's voice echoed through the courthouse. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison is reconvening court." The courtroom filled again, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. There was an electricity in the air now, a sense that something extraordinary was about to occur. The journalists, who had been outside filing stories, rushed back to their seats. Camera operators positioned themselves strategically. Everyone sensed that they were about to witness a turning point in a significant case. Judge Morrison took her seat on the bench with the gravity of someone about to deliver a judgment that would echo far beyond these courtroom walls. She looked directly at Attorney Kowalski, and the intensity of her gaze was absolutely merciless. "Mr. Kowalski," she began, her voice cold and cutting, "I have spent the last 30 minutes reviewing recordings, text messages, and email communications between you and your client, James Thompson. I have also reviewed your client's interactions with this child over the past 3 months. What I have discovered is deeply, profoundly disturbing." Kowalski's attorney stood, attempting to object, but Judge Morrison raised her hand with such commanding authority that he sat down immediately without speaking a word. "During this recess," Judge Morrison continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "I have had preliminary conversations with the district attorney's office and with Child Protective Services. The evidence I have reviewed suggests a systematic and deliberate pattern of psychological manipulation and abuse of a minor witness. You have coached this child repeatedly. You have drilled false narratives into her mind. You have used threats that a 3-year-old would go to jail if she said the wrong thing, to coerce testimony." Judge Morrison stood up from her seat, but this time her movement was deliberate and theatrical. She rose to her full height, commanding the absolute attention of everyone present. "You have violated every ethical principle of the legal profession. You have abused a position of trust and authority. You have victimized a vulnerable child in pursuit of a custody victory for your client." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the courtroom like a heavy blanket. Then, with a movement that seemed almost choreographed in its precision, Judge Morrison pointed directly at Kowalski. "This court finds that you have engaged in witness coaching, obstruction of justice, and child abuse. I am immediately suspending your law license pending a full investigation by the State Bar Association. I am referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution, and I am documenting everything that has occurred here today in my formal order, which will become part of the public record." The courtroom erupted. Journalists jumped to their feet, shouting questions. Kowalski's face went from pale to absolutely crimson. He stood up, sputtering incoherent objections, but his attorney pulled him back down into his seat, his hand on the man's arm serving as a restraint. Judge Morrison raised her gavel and brought it down with a force that echoed through the entire courthouse. The sound was like thunder, primal, powerful, and absolutely commanding. "Order," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The courtroom fell silent immediately. "This case is being immediately reopened. All previous testimony from this child is hereby declared inadmissible and void. A new custody evaluation will be conducted by court-appointed child psychologists with expertise in trauma and manipulation." She turned her attention to James Thompson. "Mr. Thompson, I am ordering an immediate suspension of your custody rights pending the outcome of this investigation. Your child will remain in the custody of her mother. You will have no unsupervised contact with this minor until such time as comprehensive evaluations determine it is safe to do so. If you are found to have conspired with Mr. Kowalski in the manipulation and abuse of this child, you will face criminal charges." Judge Morrison's eyes then found Emma, still sitting safely beside Max in the witness box. Her expression softened, but only slightly. "Emma Thompson," she said, her voice warm but carrying the weight of judicial authority, "you have shown extraordinary courage today. You have told the truth despite tremendous pressure and fear. This court is proud of you. You are not in trouble. Nothing that happened here is your fault. You are safe now." Emma's small face crumpled and fresh tears began streaming down her cheeks, but these were different tears from before. These were tears of release, of relief, of profound emotional catharsis. Max nuzzled her gently, his own response to the child's emotional breakthrough. Judge Morrison continued, her words now directed at the entire courtroom. "I want to make something absolutely clear. I am using every power granted to me as a judge to protect this child, and to ensure that those responsible for her abuse face consequences. This case will serve as a warning to every attorney, every social worker, every authority figure who thinks they can manipulate or abuse vulnerable witnesses. justice will be served, truth will prevail, and this child will have the protection and healing she deserves. She paused, then added, her voice taking on a tone of profound respect. I also want to acknowledge the extraordinary service provided by Detective Max. This dog's instincts, combined with Officer Chen's expertise, have exposed a truth that might otherwise have remained hidden. This is a reminder that sometimes the clearest perception of truth comes not from institutional systems, but from the pure, uncorrupted instincts of those whose only agenda is protection and honesty. Max's tail wagged slightly, as if the dog understood that he had been recognized, that his role in exposing the truth had been validated at the highest level of the judicial system. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Everyone present understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just a custody case, but a moment of profound justice, a demonstration that truth could overcome manipulation, and that sometimes an animal's instinct could cut through human deception in ways that no institution could match. The recess that followed Judge Morrison's thunderous ruling lasted nearly 2 hours. But this wasn't a recess in the traditional sense. It was an orchestrated intervention designed to extract the complete truth from a traumatized 3-year-old child in the safest possible environment. Child Protective Services had mobilized with impressive speed. Dr. Sarah Milstein, a renowned child psychologist specializing in trauma and witness manipulation, had arrived at the courthouse within 45 minutes of receiving Judge Morrison's call. She carried with her years of experience working with victims of psychological abuse, children who had been coached or manipulated, and young witnesses whose testimonies had been compromised by adult interference. The interview room that had been hastily prepared was nothing like the intimidating courtroom. It was designed specifically for traumatized children, soft blue walls painted with gentle clouds and friendly animals, comfortable furniture that didn't tower over small bodies, warm lighting that created an atmosphere of safety rather than judgment. There were stuffed animals arranged on shelves, books with colorful covers, and toys carefully selected to encourage natural conversation without leading or coaching. Most importantly, Max was there. Officer Marcus had been given explicit permission by Judge Morrison to remain with the dog during the interview process. The judge understood that Emma's breakthrough had been directly facilitated by Max's presence, and that removing the dog would potentially cause the child to withdraw into silence again. So Marcus sat quietly in the corner of the room, his eyes monitoring both Emma and Max, while Dr. Milstein prepared to conduct what would become one of the most important interviews in Pennsylvania's recent legal history. Emma sat on a cushioned chair that had been designed for children, her small body still wrapped in the security of Max's presence. The dog had positioned himself so that his head rested on the armrest of the chair, creating a bridge between himself and the child, a constant physical connection that reassured Emma that she was not alone, that she was protected, that someone cared about her truth more than anything else. "Hello, Emma," Dr. Milstein said softly, settling into a chair positioned at the child's eye level rather than above her. "My name is Dr. Sarah. I'm here because I want to listen to you. I want to hear about your experiences, your feelings, and everything that's been happening. There are no right or wrong answers. I just want to understand what's been going on in your life, okay?" Emma looked up at the psychologist, then down at Max, then back again. She nodded slowly, her small voice barely audible. "Okay. First, I want you to know that nothing that has happened is your fault," Dr. Milstein continued, her voice carrying the warmth of genuine compassion. "You are a very brave girl, and I'm going to ask you some questions, but you can answer them in any way you want. You can tell me stories. You can draw pictures if you want. You can play with toys while you talk. Whatever makes you comfortable. Does that sound okay?" Emma nodded again, this time with slightly more confidence. Dr. Milstein began with gentle, open-ended questions designed to establish baseline information before diving into the more difficult material. She asked Emma about her favorite foods, her favorite toys, the games she liked to play. These weren't idle questions. They were designed to help Emma feel comfortable speaking, to establish her natural communication patterns, and to assess whether her responses were genuinely hers or coached responses she had been forced to memorize. As Emma spoke about her favorite pink stuffed bunny and the songs her mother sang in the kitchen, Dr. Milstein made careful observations. The child's natural speech patterns were emerging: hesitations, childlike tangents, authentic emotional responses that couldn't be coached or manipulated. This was the real Emma, the authentic voice of a 3-year-old child who was finally being given permission to speak from her genuine experience. Then, very gradually and with careful sensitivity, Dr. Milstein began to transition toward the more difficult topics. Emma, I want to ask you about your daddy. Can you tell me about the last time you spent time with your daddy? Emma's entire body stiffened. Her hand gripped Max's fur more tightly. Max responded immediately, pressing his body more firmly against the child's side, a silent communication. I'm here. You're safe. You can tell the truth. Daddy took me to an office, Emma said slowly, her voice becoming smaller. There was a man there. His name was Mr. Kowalski. That's good, Emma. You're being very brave, Dr. Milstein encouraged gently. What happened at the office? Mr. Kowalski asked me questions. He asked about Mommy. He said Mommy was mean. He said Mommy yelled a lot. Emma paused, her small brow furrowing as she struggled with the conflicting memories. But Mommy doesn't yell that much. Mommy sings. Mommy hugs me. I see, Dr. Milstein said, making careful notes. Did Mr. Kowalski tell you what to say? Did he teach you answers to his questions? Emma nodded emphatically, relief flooding her small face that someone was finally asking the right questions, understanding what had actually happened. He said the same questions over and over. He said if I didn't remember the answers, I was being bad. He gave me candy when I said the right things. When I forgot, Daddy got angry. That must have been very scary, Dr. Milstein said softly. Emma, did anyone tell you that something bad would happen if you didn't say those things? Emma's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different from the courtroom tears. These were tears of finally being understood, of finally being able to articulate the pressure and fear that had been crushing her small spirit. Daddy said if I didn't say the things Mr. Kowalski taught me, Mommy would go to jail. He said it would be my fault. He said I would never see Mommy again. Dr. Milstein's expression remained professionally compassionate, but you could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. Anger at what adults had done to this child. Anger at the systematic manipulation. Anger at the weaponization of a child's love for her mother. Emma, I want you to know that none of what your daddy said was true, Dr. Milstein said firmly but gently. Your mommy is not going to go to jail. This is not your fault. Adults made bad choices, but those choices are not your responsibility. You didn't do anything wrong. You are a good girl. Over the next hour, the complete picture emerged. Emma described in her own words, sometimes hesitantly, sometimes rapidly, the systematic coaching she had endured. She described how Mr. Kowalski would show her pictures and ask her to identify them as things her mother had done, things that her mother had never actually done. She described how her father would quiz her repeatedly, testing her memory of the false narratives, rewarding her with treats when she performed well, expressing disappointment and anger when she faltered. Emma described moments of confusion when her own actual memories, genuine moments of playing with her mother, being read stories, receiving hugs and affection, clashed with the coached narratives about her mother being mean and neglectful. She described the cognitive dissonance of a 3-year-old mind trying to reconcile conflicting versions of reality. She described the specific moment when she realized that what she had been told about her mother going to jail was the most frightening thing she could imagine. That fear had become so dominant, so all-consuming, that she had begun to believe it completely. And that belief had made her willing to say anything, to perform whatever narrative had been requested, if it meant keeping her mother safe. Max never moved from her side. The dog's presence became an anchoring point for Emma's truth-telling, a physical reminder that there was someone in the world who cared about her genuine experience, who wasn't trying to manipulate her or shape her testimony, who simply wanted her to be safe and to speak authentically. As the interview progressed, Dr. Milstein documented everything meticulously. She took notes on Emma's emotional responses, her behavioral patterns, the way she spoke about genuine experiences versus coached narratives. She made careful observations about the psychological impact of the manipulation, the child's anxiety, her difficulty distinguishing between real and false memories, her apparent trauma response to authority figures. "Emma," Dr. Milstein said as the interview was winding down, "I want to ask you one more important question. Do you feel safe right now?" Emma looked up, her eyes moving between Dr. Milstein, Officer Marcus, and Max. She reached out and touched Max's face gently, her small hand stroking the dog's soft fur. Then she nodded. "I feel safe when Max is here, and when Mommy is here, but not when Daddy is there, and not when Mr. Kowalski is there." "That's very important information," Dr. Milstein said, "and I want you to know that adults are going to make sure you stay safe. You won't have to be around people who scare you anymore. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, though her understanding of the full implications of what had transpired was limited by her age and developmental stage. But what mattered was that she understood the core truth. She was safe now, her mother would not go to jail, and the adults who had manipulated her would face consequences for their actions. As the interview concluded, Dr. Milstein had all the documentation she needed to provide expert testimony about the systematic manipulation, the psychological impact on the child, and the unreliability of any testimony that had been obtained through coaching and coercion. Her report would become a cornerstone of the legal action that was about to be taken against both Attorney Kowalski and James Thompson. Officer Marcus stood, and Max rose with him, the dog's body still attuned to Emma's emotional state. The child reached out and gripped Max's collar, reluctant to separate from the dog who had become her protector and her voice. "Can Max stay with me?" Emma asked hopefully. Dr. Milstein looked at Officer Marcus, who nodded. Judge Morrison had already authorized such arrangements. "Yes, Emma," Dr. Milstein said warmly. "Max can stay with you for as long as you need him." The legal machinery that was set in motion following Emma's comprehensive interview moved with remarkable speed and precision. District Attorney Michael Rodriguez, a seasoned prosecutor who had built his career on protecting vulnerable populations, took the case personally. Within 72 hours of Judge Morrison's initial ruling, formal charges had been filed against Attorney David Kowalski for witness tampering, child abuse, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit perjury. The evidence was devastating and incontrovertible. Investigators had seized Kowalski's office computers and discovered a meticulously organized system of coaching materials, documents outlining the exact narratives he wanted Emma to memorize, audio recordings of his sessions with James Thompson, where they discussed the best way to get the kid to say what we need her to say, and calendars documenting the frequency and duration of coaching sessions. There were even billing records where Kowalski had charged James Thompson for witness preparation and testimony coaching sessions, charges that explicitly documented the illegal activity. Text messages between Kowalski and James Thompson painted a chilling picture of calculated manipulation. "The kid's memory is weak," one message read. "We need to drill her harder on the narrative about Mommy's anger issues." Another message stated, "If she wavers, remind her about the jail thing. That always gets her back in line." The casual cruelty with which they discussed manipulating a 3-year-old was absolutely shocking, the kind of cold-blooded calculation that made even hardened prosecutors feel physically ill. But the smoking gun came in the form of recordings Kowalski had made of his coaching sessions with Emma. He had recorded them without the knowledge of her parents, apparently for his own files to track the child's progress in learning the false narratives. On these recordings, listeners could hear Kowalski's voice, sometimes sweet and cajoling, sometimes sharp and intimidating, drilling Emma on false stories. They could hear Emma's confused responses, her hesitations, her moments of resistance. They could hear the moment when Kowalski invoked the threat about Emma's mother going to jail. "Your mommy will be in prison, Emma. They will take her away. And it will be your fault if you don't say what I told you to say." Even experienced prosecutors and law enforcement officers found the recordings difficult to listen to. The deliberate, calculated manipulation of a 3-year-old child was emotionally devastating. Several investigators had to step out of the evidence review room to compose themselves. James Thompson's legal situation deteriorated rapidly. Initially, he had attempted to claim that he didn't understand the illegal nature of what Kowalski was doing, that he had simply hired an attorney to help him win custody and didn't know the methods being employed. But that defense crumbled when investigators discovered his text messages and emails to Kowalski, which made clear that he understood exactly what was happening and had actively participated in directing the manipulation. The state's Department of Child Protective Services launched a formal investigation into James Thompson's parental fitness. They interviewed Emma multiple times in carefully controlled settings, always with a trained child psychologist present, and always with Max nearby for emotional support. Each interview confirmed the same narrative: systematic coaching, psychological threats, and deliberate manipulation designed to turn a vulnerable child against her mother. A family court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after the initial courtroom drama. Judge Morrison presided, but this time the atmosphere was fundamentally different. The case had transformed from a custody dispute into a matter of child protection and criminal justice. The courtroom was packed with representatives from various agencies: Child Protective Services, law enforcement, the district attorney's office, and court-appointed child advocacy organizations. Dr. Sarah Milstein took the witness stand and provided expert testimony about the systematic manipulation Emma had endured and its psychological impact. She described the phenomenon of coaching-induced false memories and explained how a child as young as Emma could be made to believe narratives that contradicted her actual lived experience. She testified about the trauma responses Emma was exhibiting and provided recommendations for therapeutic intervention. Officer Marcus testified about Max's behavioral responses, documenting in precise detail the dog's reactions to various stimuli in the courtroom. He explained the science behind Max's ability to detect deception and manipulation, drawing on years of research about canine behavioral analysis and emotional intelligence. His testimony provided a bridge between Emma's actual experiences and Max's uncanny ability to perceive truth beneath the surface of human deception. Most powerfully, Dr. Milstein presented video recordings of Emma in the safe interview room, not the coached, frightened child who had been brought to court, but the authentic Emma, speaking in her own words about her genuine experiences and the manipulation she had endured. Watching a 3-year-old articulate her experience of psychological abuse, seeing her small face light up when she talked about moments with her mother that hadn't been corrupted by coaching, these images had a profound impact on everyone in the courtroom. Judge Morrison's ruling was swift and absolute. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds that James Thompson engaged in systematic manipulation of a minor witness and conspired with his attorney to obtain false testimony through coaching, intimidation, and psychological abuse of a child. Such conduct demonstrates a fundamental lack of fitness for custodial rights. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the courtroom. Effective immediately, James Thompson's parental rights are suspended pending completion of a comprehensive psychological evaluation and mandatory parenting education program focused on child development and the recognition of trauma. Any contact between Mr. Thompson and his minor daughter will be supervised by court-appointed monitors until such time as evaluations determine it is safe to proceed otherwise. Turning to Sarah Thompson, Judge Morrison's expression softened. The court hereby grants full custodial rights to Sarah Thompson, the child's mother. This court finds that the evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that Emma Thompson is safe with her mother and that her well-being is best served by remaining in her mother's primary custody. Then, addressing the entire courtroom, Judge Morrison made a statement that would be quoted in legal proceedings across the country. This case represents a fundamental failure of institutional safeguards designed to protect vulnerable witnesses. A 3-year-old child was systematically manipulated, threatened, and psychologically abused by adults who should have been bound by ethical obligations to protect her. The only reason this abuse was exposed was due to the extraordinary instincts of a police dog and the willingness of a judge to look beyond conventional courtroom procedures to seek truth. The criminal proceedings against attorney Kowalski moved forward with similar decisiveness. The Pennsylvania State Bar Association revoked his license to practice law, making his disbarment permanent and preventing him from ever practicing law again. Criminal charges proceeded through the court system, and faced with overwhelming evidence and the likelihood of conviction, Kowalski eventually accepted a plea agreement. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison for child abuse and witness tampering, a sentence that reflected the severity of his crimes and the vulnerability of his victim. James Thompson's fate was more complex. He entered a plea agreement that resulted in 2 years of probation, mandatory psychological treatment, and a substantial financial settlement to Sarah Thompson for the psychological harm inflicted on Emma. More importantly, he was required to complete an intensive parenting program before any unsupervised contact with his daughter could be reestablished. Officer Marcus received formal commendations from the Philadelphia Police Department, the mayor's office, and the Pennsylvania State Police Association. He was invited to speak at law enforcement conferences and training programs about the value of police dogs in detecting psychological manipulation and protecting vulnerable populations. But the most significant recognition came from the legal community itself. Judge Morrison authored a comprehensive ruling that outlined the circumstances under which trained animals could be permitted in courtrooms during the testimony of child witnesses. Her decision became known as the Emma Decision, and it spread to 17 states within 2 years. Training programs were established to certify dogs specifically for courtroom service with vulnerable witnesses. Universities began researching the science behind canine behavioral analysis and its reliability in detecting deception. Max was awarded the Medal of Valor by the Philadelphia Police Department, the first police dog in the department's history to receive such an honor for work unrelated to drug detection or criminal apprehension. More importantly, Max became an official part of the Pennsylvania court system's victim advocacy program. He was assigned to work specifically with traumatized child witnesses, accompanying them through the legal process and helping them find the courage to speak their truth. Sarah Thompson filed a civil lawsuit against Kowalski and James Thompson, seeking damages for the psychological harm inflicted on Emma. The case was settled out of court for a substantial sum that Sarah placed in a trust fund for Emma's future education and mental health care. The transformation in Emma's life was gradual but profound. With her mother's love, professional psychological support, and Max's constant companionship, the frightened, manipulated child began to heal. She stopped having nightmares. Her anxiety decreased. She developed new friendships and engaged in normal childhood activities. The false memories that had been implanted by Kowalski gradually faded, replaced by authentic recollections of her genuine experiences. 18 months had passed since that extraordinary day in Judge Morrison's courtroom, when a 3-year-old child whispered the truth to a police dog and changed the course of American legal history. The Philadelphia Police Department's headquarters had become an unexpected sanctuary for a young girl who was learning to live again, to trust again, to believe in the goodness of the world after experiencing its cruelty. Emma Thompson, now almost 5 years old, ran through the corridors of the police station with the unself-conscious joy of a child who had been given her life back. Her blonde hair bounced as she sprinted toward the K-9 unit, her pink sneakers squeaking against the polished floors. Behind her, Sarah Thompson, Emma's mother and her protector, walked with a smile that reached her eyes for the first time in years. The haunted expression that had marked Sarah's face during the legal proceedings had been replaced by genuine happiness and peace. "Max, Max, I'm here," Emma shouted as she burst into the K-9 unit's main room. The German Shepherd, now 6 years old and in his prime, immediately stood from his resting position. But his response to Emma was entirely different from his response to other people. With Emma, Max's entire demeanor transformed. His professional alertness softened into what could only be described as affection. The dog's tail wagged with such vigor that his entire back end seemed to move in rhythm with it. Emma threw her arms around Max's neck, and the dog lowered his head gently, allowing the child to embrace him fully. Officer Marcus Chen stood nearby, watching the interaction with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed genuine healing. The bond between this child and this dog had become legendary within the police department, a living symbol of the power of truth, protection, and unconditional love. "We brought you something, Max," Emma announced, pulling a small paper bag from her mother's hands. Inside was a special dog treat, a homemade peanut butter and sweet potato biscuit that Sarah had baked specifically for Max. Emma carefully fed the treat to the dog, watching with absolute delight as Max consumed it with obvious enjoyment. The walls of the police station's K-9 unit were covered with Emma's artwork. Drawing after drawing, each one more sophisticated than the last as Emma's artistic skills developed, depicted her and Max together. In some drawings, Max wore a cape and was labeled Hero Dog. In others, Max and Emma sat together under a rainbow, with the sun shining brightly. There were drawings of Emma hugging Max, drawings of them playing together in a park, drawings of Max protecting Emma from stick figure representations of bad people. Emma's artwork had become part of the police department's permanent collection, a visual documentation of a child's healing process and her gratitude toward the dog who had given her voice when her own voice had been silenced by fear and manipulation. Sarah sat down in a comfortable chair in the break room while Emma spent time with Max. She pulled out a journal, one she had been keeping since the resolution of the court case, and began writing. These journals had become her way of processing the trauma of what her daughter had endured and her profound gratitude for the people and animals who had protected Emma. "Dear Journal," she wrote, her handwriting flowing across the page, "today marks another beautiful day in our new life. Emma has asked me if she can visit Max every Friday for the rest of her life. I told her that sounded like a perfect plan. She's thriving in her preschool now. Her teacher says she's one of the most empathetic children in the classroom, that Emma seems to instinctively understand when other children are hurting and knows how to comfort them. I wonder if that comes from her own experience, from understanding what it feels like when adults hurt you. I wonder if trauma can be transformed into compassion." Across town, Judge Patricia Morrison sat in her judicial chambers, reviewing the latest statistics on the Emma decision. Since her landmark ruling 18 months ago, 17 states had adopted protocols allowing trained animals in courtrooms during vulnerable witness testimony. 43 additional cases involving coached or manipulated child witnesses had been identified and reopened. Dozens of attorneys had faced disciplinary action or criminal charges. Hundreds of children had been protected from having their testimonies corrupted by adult manipulation. Judge Morrison had received numerous awards and recognitions for her work in child protection and judicial reform. Universities had invited her to speak about innovative approaches to protecting vulnerable witnesses. The American Bar Association had cited her ruling as a model for ethical jurisprudence. But what mattered most to her was a simple handmade card that sat on her desk, created by Emma Thompson's hands. The card depicted a simple scene: a judge in a black robe sitting above a little girl and a big dog. In Emma's childish handwriting were the words, "Thank you, Judge Lady, for helping me tell the truth. Max and me are best friends forever. Love, Emma." Dr. Sarah Milstein, the child psychologist who had conducted Emma's comprehensive interview, had become a nationally recognized expert on coaching-induced false memories and trauma recovery in children. She had published 3 peer-reviewed articles on Emma's case, with all identifying information changed to protect the child's privacy, and had been invited to speak at conferences across the country about recognizing signs of witness manipulation in child testimony. More importantly, Dr. Milstein had expanded her practice to include a specialized program for children who had been victims of psychological manipulation. Emma had become one of her success stories, a child whose trajectory had been redirected from a path of psychological damage toward one of healing and resilience. Officer Marcus Chen had become something of a celebrity within law enforcement circles. He had been invited to train other police officers about the behavioral indicators of witness manipulation and the role of police dogs in detecting deception. He had worked with training programs to develop specialized curricula for dogs destined to work with vulnerable witnesses. His partnership with Max had become the gold standard for human-animal teams dedicated to victim protection. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus had become a mentor to younger officers, always emphasizing the same principle. Sometimes the most important tool in seeking justice isn't technology or legal procedure. Sometimes it's the willingness to trust instinct, to listen to what animals can perceive that humans miss, and to prioritize the truth above all institutional convenience. Attorney Jennifer Martinez, who had represented Sarah Thompson in the custody case, had made a significant career shift. She had become the director of a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting children's rights in custody disputes and ensuring that vulnerable witnesses received proper protection in court proceedings. Her work had touched thousands of families, but she always credited Emma's case as the catalyst for her transformation. "That little girl showed me what real courage looks like," Jennifer would say in interviews. She had every reason to remain silent, every incentive to continue with the false narrative she had been forced to memorize. But something inside her, something that resonated with a dog's pure recognition of truth, gave her the strength to speak authentically. That experience changed my entire understanding of what it means to be a lawyer committed to justice. The most visible transformation, however, was undeniably in Emma herself. The frightened, trembling child who had entered Judge Morrison's courtroom 18 months earlier had been replaced by a confident, articulate, and compassionate young girl. She had recovered from the psychological trauma of being manipulated. She had rebuilt her trust in her mother. She had developed healthy relationships with peers and adults who had proven themselves trustworthy. Her therapist, Dr. Milstein, documented Emma's progress with clinical precision, but also with genuine emotion. "Emma represents the resilience of the human spirit," Dr. Milstein wrote in her final case report. Despite being systematically manipulated by adults she trusted, despite being threatened with devastating consequences if she told the truth, despite the psychological burden of being forced to doubt her own perceptions of reality, this child found a path back to authenticity, truth, and emotional health. The report included a passage that summarized Emma's extraordinary recovery. Emma's breakthrough came not through institutional intervention, though institutional intervention was certainly necessary and important. Emma's breakthrough came through connecting with a being, a dog, who asked nothing of her except truth, who did not manipulate or coach her, who simply offered unconditional acceptance and protection. In a world where adults had failed her, a dog's pure instinct for truth became her salvation. On a sunny Friday afternoon, exactly 20 months after the initial courtroom proceedings, a special ceremony was held at the Philadelphia Police Department. Emma, now 5 years old, stood beside Max while Judge Morrison presented the dog with an official plaque recognizing him as the first court-certified canine advocate for child witnesses in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Emma clutched a bouquet of flowers, sunflowers that she had chosen because they were as happy as Max and I feel. She wore a pink dress and had her blonde hair curled perfectly, but there was nothing coached or artificial about her demeanor. This was a child who had learned to be authentically herself. As cameras flashed and journalists documented the moment, Emma leaned down and whispered something into Max's ear. Not a secret testimony, not a hidden truth, but simple words of love and gratitude. "Thank you for saving me, Max. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Max's tail wagged with such force that it seemed to express the joy of an entire universe. The dog had not just solved a crime or exposed a manipulation scheme. Max had given voice to the voiceless. Max had transformed a traumatized child into a survivor. Max had demonstrated that sometimes truth requires no words, only the pure, uncorrupted instinct of a being whose only agenda is love and protection. Years later, when Emma was a teenager, she would volunteer at the police department's K-9 unit, helping to train the next generation of dogs destined to work with vulnerable witnesses. She would tell her story, not with shame or victimhood, but with the authority of someone who had been tested by darkness and had chosen the light. Her story became legendary in legal circles, in psychological research, in law enforcement training programs across the country. The Emma Thompson case was taught in law schools as an example of how innovation, compassion, and willingness to think beyond conventional procedures could protect the vulnerable and advance justice. But for Emma, the most important outcome was simpler and more profound. She had been given her life back. She had her mother. She had her voice. She had Max. And she had learned in the most difficult way possible that truth, when spoken with courage and heard with compassion, has the power to transform everything. The Philadelphia Police Department's K-9 unit remained her sanctuary, the place where she had learned to trust again, where she had witnessed the power of unconditional love, where she had discovered that sometimes a dog knows the truth better than any human institution ever could. And Max, loyal, intelligent, eternally devoted Max, became not just a police dog, but a symbol of hope for every vulnerable child trying to find their voice in a world that had tried to silence them.